I'm very much excited to actually bring this topic called ISE posture compliance. Because of too much depth and too much details that need to be covered under the ISE posture compliance service, we thought of actually taking this session into two parts. In the part one, we're going to be covering this agenda overview of what exactly the ISE posture service is. What are the different agent types supported? What exactly the discovery process is? The posture redirection versus redirection-less flow, posture workflow, and how do we monitor and report it? So you might be wondering about an existing webinar that we have done a long back during 2021 timeframe. The idea is to actually go in depth what was not covered earlier, so that you can make use of these part 1 and part 2 sessions as a benchmark for you to refer going forward. Now, let's take a look at the overview of a posture compliance service. Before we even go through that overview, why is it important? Why the posture service or a compliance service is important? It takes few minutes of a cyber incident to ruin your network. That was the reason why we were supposed to constantly, as an administrator, monitor the security compliance of our organization and the endpoints that are connecting to the network. What exactly the security compliance is? The security compliance is nothing but a process of adhering to rules, regulations, guidelines, standards, laws, or a checks, whatever the administrator was levied on. Now, what are the compliance services offered from a Cisco ISE? There are 3 services offered from a Cisco ISE called Posture Service, MDM Service, and a TC-NAC, Threat-Centric NAC service. All of them requires premier license. And we're going to be covering the Posture Compliance Service in our topic today. The Posture Service is supported on the Windows, Mac, and a Linux operating system. And what exactly the posture service is? It's basically, as an administrator, I want to actually look for different kind of checks, such as whether my endpoints coming over the network or connecting to the network, whether they are up to date with the patches, whether they are up to date with an anti-malware definitions, whether they were enabled with a disk encryption. Those kind of security compliance checks is what basically posture service is. Once after doing all these checks, we wanted to get the posture status of that endpoint so that we can give the access to the endpoints coming over the network. Not all these checks are actually supported on each and every operating system that we have talked about. So let's deep dive into what are the operating systems supported, or what are the checks and respective operating systems supported. To get started with, these are the checks basically possible for you to create or configure on a Windows, Mac, and a Linux operating systems. Whereas hardware, disk encryption, firewall, service checks can be done on the Windows and the Mac operating systems. USB registry checks are possible for you to create on a Windows operating system alone. And dictionary simple condition and dictionary compound conditions are possible, are kind of OS agnostic ones. So all these checks are basically dependent on the security compliance module, AnyConnect compliance module, or a Cisco security client compliance module version. There are 2 security compliance module versions that were supported on AnyConnect and the Cisco secure client, 4.x and a 3.x compliance module versions. Specifically, these antivirus and anti-spyware and compound conditions are configured or kind of a legacy checks, which were dependent on the AnyConnect 3.x compliance model. And this AnyConnect 3.x compliance model was already end of life, end of sale, end of service, end of maintenance period long back, precisely 6 years ago. So you might be wondering, what is the alternative for me? Instead of making use of an anti-spyware and antivirus, you can make use of an anti-malware. Instead of making use of a compound condition, you can make use of a patch management. Those are the alternatives which are possible from long back. But they are still out there in the UI, and we still need a cleanup on our UI to eliminate this. Coming down to the remediation, when specific check is being performed on the endpoint, let's say as an administrator, I have created or configured a condition to look for a firewall enable policy on the endpoint connecting to the network. If it is not enabled, what do I have to do? The end user doesn't have to do it. It's supposed to be automatically remediated so that the firewall gets enabled automatically. That's what the remediation process is. So when specific check is failing, the remediation is automatically performed, or a manual remediation can be performed. So what are the remediations, different remediations possible, and supported operating systems? The one and only remediation supported on all the operating system, Windows, Linux, and Mac, is a script remediation. Whereas application, anti-malware, files, so on and so forth are supported on a Windows and Mac operating systems. These remediations are possible only on the Windows operating systems. Again, the remediation is also actually dependent on the compliance module, 4.x and 3.x. And these three, anti-spyware, antivirus, Windows Update, and OSOS Update, were kind of actually dependent on AnyConnect 3.x compliance module, which was already called end of life long back. So you can make use of an alternative remediation methods rather than depending on them. Now, at a high level, these are the capabilities or features or checks possible on a different operating system or with a different agents. You might be wondering, what are these different agents that we are talking about? Well, we're going to cover it a little later. So if you take a look at this, AnyConnect has this superior capability supported. That was the reason why AnyConnect, or a Cisco security client, is what recommended from Cisco for posture service. Now, what exactly the posture workflow is? Well, the supported operating system for a posture service is Windows, Mac, and Linux. And when these devices come over the network via wired, wireless, or a VPN, on behalf of the devices, the network access devices are going to send the radius access request to the PSN so that they can get authenticated against the PSN. PSN in turn validates them against the specific identity store, respective identity stores that were configured. Once the authentication is successful, then because this is the first time the endpoint is getting connected, the PSN might not be knowing the posture status of the endpoint that was connecting to the network. So the posture status is unknown at this point of time. So we don't want to give the full network access to the devices coming over the network just based on the posture status is equal to unknown. So we wanted to give them a restricted access so that it is DNS service is allowed, DHCP is allowed. Whenever they are talking to this specific PSN or a remediation servers, it is allowed. So you might want to restrict the traffic flow for the endpoint so that once after they become compliant or non-compliant, you can modify the access given to the endpoint. Now, this is where the Cisco Secure Client sitting on the endpoint goes ahead and talks to the PSN, sends a posture request to the PSN that it got authenticated with, and pulls the posture policies for it to evaluate. It evaluates the posture policies and then creates a report, sends that report to the PSN, and PSN decides whether the endpoint is compliant against all the posture policies that were configured or not. This is where the posture status gets changed from an unknown to the compliant, or it might become even non-compliant as well. So whenever there is a change in the posture state of the endpoint, that's when it is the posture service sitting on the PSN is going to issue the COA to the endpoint so that it gets compliant or non-compliant access accordingly. Coming down to the agentless posture flow, well, the name itself implies that there is no AnyConnect or a Cisco secure client installed or running on the endpoint itself. So how can we get the posture status of the endpoint then? So well, when these devices coming over the network via wired, wireless, or a VPN through the MAB or a .1x method, they'll get evaluated against the identity store or a respective identity store. And that's when the authorization policy is going to be matching with an authorization profile in which agentless posture flag is enabled. So this is to ensure, so and so out of 1,000 devices got connected to the network. Whatever the sessions which are having the agentless posture flag enabled, for those endpoints, ISE is going to contact them straight away. Through what? They're going to be contacting them through the PowerShell or a shell mechanism. Well, ISE is going to make use of a PowerShell in order to connect it to Windows, whereas shell mechanism to connect to the SSH mechanism to connect to the Mac operating system. That's when it's going to push the agentless plugin and a required certificate to the endpoint so that it evaluates using the agentless plugin deployed to the endpoint. It evaluates the posture status, updates the posture status, and gets the compliant access. That's how the agentless posture workflow completes. Now, if you take a look at the work center in the posture service, ISE posture service, it was basically divided into 3 parts: preparation, configuration, and go live. So we're going to be going in deep of each and every aspect in today's session. So let's talk about the preparation. Preparation of what? Preparation of network devices, preparation of your posture updates, preparation of settings. Let's go and talk about individual aspect again. Before even we configure anything, the first and foremost thing is to let the ISE know that it is going to receive the radius request coming from so-and-so known network devices. You're supposed to configure those network devices into ISE so that it can process the radius request coming from these known network devices. Well, we have already covered a lot of webinar sessions earlier. You can take a look at how do we manage these network devices in our earlier webinar session. Now, at a high level, let me tell you what exactly it is. At a high level, the network devices can be imported onto ISE and can be configured into groups so that you can create a policy sets based on their location, based on their medium like a wired, wireless VPN, or based on their organization entities, or based on the vendor or model. Well, let's go through the demonstration of it. Now I logged into ISE and I'm going through the network device groups and I'm trying to download the network device groups first. The network device groups are kind of actually based on different types, based on different locations that I have already configured with. Just to let you know, under all locations, this is my territory. I'm trying to actually logically create the deployment, stating that I have these many regions, these many locations, including the building, floors, or even rooms as well. You can go ahead and configure it. Once after you import the network device groups, you're supposed to import the network devices or configure the network devices and associate them to the network device groups. So once after we imported them, if you take a look at this, these are the network devices which were already there in my testbed or my deployment, where each and every individual device is actually configured or associated to a specific location or a specific type of a device. So these are the network devices which are initiating the radius request to the PSN. From these network access devices, if at all there is any radius request coming over to the PSN, it's going to evaluate and then process that radius request too. Now, the next aspect under preparation, the posture updates. What exactly the posture update is? Well, basically, whenever you wanted to create a posture policy, or whenever you wanted to check for so and so, consider this example. I wanted to look at Windows operating system, Windows 11 operating system, for a specific anti-malware such as semantic anti-malware, for a specific version of semantic anti-malware. Well, ISE has to maintain such kind of a support chat of an operating system, anti-malwares, patch management systems, even disk encryptions, so on and so forth. All these are kind of actually by default available in ISE, but they're gonna keep on updated through the feed URL. So once after we install the ISE, it's gonna have the support chat, preliminary support chat, which might not be up to date with. So you're supposed to actually update them through online or an offline method if at all your ISE is kind of air gap. ISE is deployed in an air gap network. If it is online, we have again two possibilities for us to reach the feed URL and update the support chat information. You can either, if at all your ISE is reachable to the feed service straight away, you can make use of an online way, or if at all it is possible for ISE to reach the feed URL via proxy service, you can configure proxy and reach the feed URL and get the update accordingly. And the feed URL is making use of this certificate, Hydrant ID certificate, SSL G3, which was already available in ISE, just for your reference purpose. Now let's update our ISE as well. I logged into my ISE. Now let's go to the Work Center, Posture Work Center, Settings, Software Updates. In my testbed, the ISE, it can reach the posture feed URL through proxy only. That's the reason why let me configure the proxy server. And once after that, I wanted to reach the posture feed URL on a regular basis. I can set the time interval. Let's say for every 24 hours, I want my ISE to reach the feed URL and then get the update from it. Because it was the first time that we already installed ISE, we don't have any update available so far. Let's update it. And it might take a couple of minutes for it to update for the first time. So notice that the versions got changed. And how much time it took for me to update this posture feed URL? Well, you can go and take a look at under Audit, Operational Audit Report. Run the operational audit. If you notice this, it was initiated around 1736. That's when the posture update got started, and 1742 is when it got up. The posture update was completed. That means around 6 minutes it took for ISE to update the feed information or the supporting chat information. This is for the first time, but subsequent feed update might not take this much time, because we are jumping to a bigger version of a feed update support chat information. That was the reason why ISE was taking so much time to get the feed update and update its support chat information. Subsequent update might not take this much time. Now, coming down to the third aspect under preparation, settings. Well, we're not going to go deep dive onto these global settings. We're going to deep dive in our next part. But we're going to make use of a default posture global settings or a general settings. We're not going to change them. We're going to make use of these general settings itself. Now, let's come down to our next workflow in our posture service workflow. The next aspect is configure. Configure what? Configuring your client provisioning policies, configuring your posture policies, configuring your access policies. Let's take a look at the individual aspect again under configuration. Client provisioning policies is to deploy the Cisco Secure Client or AnyConnect to the endpoints with a configuration with a profile so that Cisco Secure Client can be deployed to the endpoint. Yeah, well, you might be wondering, can I deploy it only from ISE? No. You can also deploy Cisco Secure Client or AnyConnect configuration profiles through these software distribution systems. Now, what are we deploying? Basically, we are deploying different agents to the endpoints. And what are those different agents supported? Well, there are 4 different agent types supported. One is a persistent agent, which is installed as a UI and which is recommended because of the more control or features offered from it. The second one is a stealth agent, where the stealth agent runs as a service in the background. There is no UI involved in it, so that the user experience or a user doesn't even come to know that there is an agent running on it. It's just to give the user experience, different user experience altogether. The third one is a temporal agent, which is a executable file, and it's going to vanish automatically once after the posture evaluation happens. You can deploy temporal agent only from an ISE and VPN headends, not from software distribution systems. Agentless, the name itself implies that there is no agent that is supposed to be installed on the endpoint in order to get the posture status of the endpoint. Well, because the name itself implies that there is no agent, there is no UI, and there is no user interaction which is required as well. But however, because of no UI, no user interaction available, there are very limited features and limited controls available in the Agentless. We're going to be covering the configuration aspect of each and every agent type. How do we configure them? How do we deploy them? And how do we monitor and report them in again and again? We're going to be repeating the same thing for each and every agent type in our next session, part 2 session. But well, in this session, let's concentrate on the persistent agent, which is the recommended one because of more controls that it offers. Now, okay, the persistent agent is recommended. What is the agent that is supposed to be deployed to the endpoints? Well, there are 2 different agents which are supported: Cisco Secure Client 5.x and Cisco AnyConnect 4.x. Cisco AnyConnect 4.x was the old one, and the Cisco Secure Client is the latest one. Well, do I have to deploy AnyConnect or do I have to deploy Secure Client? Well, Secure Client 5.x is the latest and recommended one, whereas your AnyConnect 4.x was already called end of life, and software maintenance was already ended in 2 months back, March. So starting from 3.3, 3.2 P1, 3.1 P5, 3.0 P7, 2.7 P8 onwards, you can make use of a Cisco Secure Client. So whoever is making use of a Cisco AnyConnect 4.x, they're supposed to actually update their client to the 5.x, the latest one. Now, if you take a look at our ISE compatibility information, let's take a look at the ISE 3.3, which is the latest one. And if you take a look at the validated agents, it was clearly mentioned that these are the version and respective patches onwards, the Cisco Secure Client is supported. Well, these are the agents which were validated on a Windows, Mac, and a Linux operating systems respectively. Even though it was not mentioned about a Cisco Secure Client version over here, it was already supported is what the takeaway that you are supposed to take. Now, let's understand the process in deploying the agent to the endpoints and how come the Cisco Secure Client or AnyConnect tries to contact the PSN that it got authenticated with, and how it evaluates the posture policy and gets the compliant or a non-compliant access accordingly. This is what the process is going to be. The agent has supposed to be downloaded and installed. You can download it from the ISE head or a head-end device like a VPN distribution systems, or you can even deploy the agent from the software distribution systems also. Once after the agent is available, the agent responsibility is to contact the specific PSN that it got authenticated with. Because let's say Pavan got connected to the network and the agent sitting on the endpoint doesn't even know to which PSN that it got authenticated with. So the agent's responsibility is to discover what is the PSN that it got authenticated with. That's what the agent discovery process is. And this agent discovery process has two types, redirection or a redirection-less flow, with which it will try to identify the PSN that it got authenticated, the endpoint got authenticated with. Once after it identifies the PSN that it got authenticated with, it will try to contact that PSN, gets any update. If at all Cisco Secure Client 5.1 was installed and the 5.2 was available on the head end, it will try to get it updated. If the profile being modified on the ISE or a head end system, it gets updated. So that's the second step. And the third step, once after it updated, its responsibility is to pull the posture policies, evaluate them, and get the compliant or a non-compliant access accordingly. So do I have to download and update it? Do I have to download the agent again and again? Well, the endpoint, whenever it connects to the network, if the endpoint has the Cisco Secure Client or AnyConnect on the endpoint, the Secure Client is automatically tries to discover the PSN that it got authenticated with, the device got authenticated with, evaluates the posture policies, and then gets the compliant or non-compliant access. Now, in a redirection flow, how come the agent gets downloaded from the ISE? As I said earlier, the agent can be distributed to the endpoints via two methods. It can be deployed from an ISE or from a VPN head-end systems. The second way is to deploy from a software distribution systems. We're going to be covering the redirection flow where you can get it from the ISE itself. This is where the posture redirection flow works. Considering a situation where these Windows, Mac, and Linux endpoints coming over the network via wired, wireless, or VPN through .1x VPN or a web authentication methods, gets authenticated against the PSN. PSN evaluates the policies configured on it, and then gets the radius access accept with a specific URL redirect ACL, and a DACL. Initially, because the PSN gives the restricted access because we don't know, the PSN doesn't even know what is the posture status of the endpoint is. Its responsibility is to give the restricted access to the endpoint so that they can go ahead and talk to the DNS server, go ahead and talk to the DHCP servers, go ahead and talk to the remediation servers, go ahead and talk to the PSN servers, PSNs. So that's the restricted access. If at all they were trying to contact anything else, the traffic is restricted. Consider a situation the browser initiates let's say Cisco.com. I'm trying to connect to the network. I got authenticated with, and URL redirect ACL, URL redirect was enforced on my session. Considering that I got considering that the device gets the connectivity, I'll try to access some URL, something like a Cisco.com. This is when the network access device gets that HTTP request, and because of a HTTP server and HTTP server enabled on the network access device, HTTP interception happens at the network device layer. What is that a network device is doing over here? The network device intercepts that HTTP packet. Oh, you're not supposed to talk. You're not allowed to talk to Cisco.com. You're not allowed to talk to Yahoo or Google.com. You're supposed to be redirected to so and so PSN. It will send the HTTP 302 code, HTTP response with the 302 code, having the URL redirect. That URL redirect itself contains the PSN, FQDN, and a port number that it is supposed to contact with. Knowing that the browser is supposed to be redirected to so-and-so PSN, client provisioning portal, the browser gets redirected to client provisioning portal on a PSN IP over 8443 port, and the connection is secured with the client provisioning portal certificate. Now, once it gets redirected to client provisioning portal, it tries to download the network setup assistant, and then in turn downloads the agent. That's how you're going to be deploying the agent or a secure client to the endpoint. Now, in order to deploy the agent from head-end devices like ISE or a VPN head-end systems, we are supposed to actually configure the client provisioning policies. Let's go through our demonstration. How do we deploy agents to the respective operating systems? Considering I'm only demonstrating the Windows operating system, I went to software.cisco.com, Cisco Secure Client downloads page, and I'm looking for a Windows pre-deployment package.pkg file. I'm downloading the Secure Client, the latest and recommended version. And then after, I'm going to be downloading the compliance module as well. And this compliance module for a Windows, it's a PKG file through which you, with which you can actually configure the client provisioning policies. So let's look at the Work Center, Posture Work Center client provisioning resources, where you can upload the downloaded packages. I wanted to first deploy the Cisco Secure Client package first. Submit the configuration, and ISE asks for confirming the checksum value, whether it was properly downloaded and verified. Then after, I'm going to be configuring the agent resource, or I'm going to be uploading the agent resource called ISE compliance package for Windows operating system. And at the submit, ISE is going to ask me for confirmation of a checksum. Once after confirming it, we have two packages available in ISE now. Now, before even we configure agent configuration, we need an agent posture profile. So let's go ahead and configure this agentless posture profile. Let's not worry about all these options. We're going to be deep dive, or we're going to be making use of them in upcoming sessions, upcoming demo. But what I wanted to actually configure is the server name rules. Any server which is in my domain called dominion.in is supposed to be contacted, is what I'm trying to configure with. So then after, I'm going to be configuring the agent configuration with the selected Cisco Secure Client for Windows. Give it a name. Select the compliance module to be installed or deployed. By default, ISE posture requires a VPN module as well. And associate this posture profile and submit the configuration. Now that we have a resource configured or an agent configuration available, let's go ahead and configure the default Windows client provisioning policy with the agent configuration that we have configured. Now, this is how you're supposed to repeat the process for a Mac and a Linux operating systems. Now, without even configuring the access policies, how do we even deploy the agents to the endpoints or clients to the endpoints? So let's go ahead and configure the access policies as well. Let's go to the Posture Work Center. Remember, these are the network devices that were imported in ISE. And I'm going to be creating a policy set based on the location of network devices that were imported earlier. So I'm going to create a policy set, give it a name called employee posture. I'm going to be making use of device type and device location conditions in order to let the endpoints matches with the policy set. My intention here is to create a condition specifically coming from any network device that is configured in my ISE. So any network device which is there in the my territory location or starts with an APJC region or starts with my territory region, or if at all the device type is VPN concentrated, I want to match the endpoint request to this employee posture policy set. Once after configuring the policy set, the next responsibility is to configure the authentication policy. Let's configure for .1x, give it a name, .1x, and let the endpoint coming over wired or a wireless .1x authentication, or it is or. I wanted to make use of all user ID stores in which my Active Directory was already configured here. Let's configure for a VPN as well. For a VPN, we're going to be making use of a radius attribute called NAS port type. Any radius request coming from a VPN concentrator has this NAS port type equals to virtual. So we are trying to match that radius request with this specific authentication policy. Whenever it comes, it looks into the all user ID stores sequence in which Active Directory was also configured. So once after that, we're going to configure the authorization policy. The first one is to, when the endpoint comes into the network for the first time, their compliance is unknown. So if at all it is unknown, I wanted to give this authorization profile as part of an access accept. Let's give it a name called posture unknown access. Scroll down to common task, select the client provisioning posture. Let's configure an ACL name. This is initially is my ACL, which was configured in my network devices, and I'm making use of client provisioning portal to be redirected to. So let's associate that authorization profile which was created, and let's create one more authorization profile for compliant devices to be matched with. Let's give it a name called compliant access. Whenever it matches with the compliance status is compliant, then it matches with this policy. So those devices are going to get this authorization profile called compliant profile. So I'm basically governing the traffic through the ACL alone here. So full access ACL was already configured in my network access device that I'm referring over here. Let's configure the non-compliant access policy for the non-compliant devices. This time, we're going to make use of non-compliant device condition, which is already available by default. And whenever they match with the specific policy, I want the endpoints to get enforced with specific ACL called restricted. This restricted ACL is going to allow only DNS, DHCP, or a ISE or a remediation service alone, nothing else. It was the, I think it is non-compliant profile. Yes, that's the non-compliant profile that we were supposed to associate to non-compliant access policy. And this is how you are basically configuring the access policy. So in a nutshell, we configured 3 policies, one for unknown, second for compliant devices, third for non-compliant devices, to get different kind of an authorization accordingly. Now, consider the situation where the agent was already deployed. We're going to be anyway doing a demonstration on that. So, but I wanted to actually let you know, considering an example where you have already deployed the Cisco Secure Client. Now, the Cisco Secure Client doesn't even know to which PSN that it is supposed to talk to. That's where the discovery process comes into play. Cisco Secure Client discovery process is to identify the PSN that the device got authenticated with. And this has 2 flows. One is called redirection, another one is redirection-less flow. Whatever the access policy that we have configured is for the redirection flow. So how come Cisco Secure Client tries to discover the PSN that the device got authenticated with? So considering a situation, you have already Cisco Secure Client on the endpoint, it goes through the discovery process in 2 stages, stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 1 is meant for a redirection flow. Stage 2 is meant for a redirection-less flow. In stage 1, we have these 4 probes, which are, all of them are going to be in parallel. Basically, if you look at the probe 1, the Cisco Secure Client tries to access HTTP over the default gateway. Probe 2, it will try to contact the enroll.cisco.com over HTTP. Probe 3, it will try to contact the discovery host. And the main intention for the first 3 probes is to get redirect ACL or a redirect URL. That URL redirect is going to contain the PSN FQDN and the port number that it's supposed to contact with. All these probes, main intention is to find the PSN that it is supposed to contact with. In redirection flow, whenever the Cisco Secure Client tries to contact enroll.cisco.com or a default gateway or a discovery host, for any of the probe, you're going to get a response as a URL redirect. That URL redirect is going to consist of PSN FQDN and a PSN port number. That's when it's going to contact that PSN automatically. Considering a second scenario where I haven't configured a redirection at all, but I want my Cisco Secure Client to talk to a specific PSN that it contacts with. So I'm basically statically mapping or statically configuring Cisco Secure Client to talk to a specific PSN over a specific port number with what called call home list. This call home list, we're going to be demonstrating it in a couple of minutes. This call home list is to allow the Cisco Secure Client to talk to a specific PSN. No matter whether you got authenticated with a PSN1.cisco.com or a PSN2.cisco.com, if it matches with the call home list, it will try to contact that call home list PSN FQDN and over 8443. The second one, stage 2 involves 2 probes, probe 1 and probe 2. Probe 1 is to contact the specific PSN configured under call home list. Probe 2 is going to be initiated when the probe 1 gets timed out. What does it mean? Probe 1 and probe 2 are a sequential one. So when probe 1 doesn't get any response back, that's when the probe 2 is going to get initiated. The probe 2 is to contact, okay, I haven't heard from anything. I haven't got anything in the call home list. Nobody was actually giving me any response. So, well, then it's going to make use of a connection data XML file, which was populated earlier with the earlier connection data. The earlier connected PSN that it will try to contact with. That's when it's going to get the session owner or the PSN that it got authenticated with. So all these probes are allowing the Cisco secure client to discover the PSN that it got authenticated with. That's the main agenda of all this. So, well, you might be wondering, when should I make use of a redirection flow or a redirection-less flow? Well, you might be a customer who doesn't want to have a bad user experience you don't want to have a user experience where whenever the endpoint gets connected to the network, it gets redirected to a specific client provisioning portal. I don't want my endpoints to be redirected to a specific client provisioning portal. In such case, you can go with a redirection-less flow. Or if your network device doesn't even support a URL redirect, that's when also you can go ahead with a redirection-less flow. But if your network device supports it and you don't have any problem of user experience, whenever they connect to the network, you don't have any problem to let them redirect to the client provisioning portal, that's when you can go ahead and configure the redirection flow. You can go ahead with the redirection flow. The redirection flow helps you to download the agent from an ISE, or if at all there is any update available, it's going to update it, either the configuration version or a profile. And redirection flow will, stage 1 discovery process is for the redirection flow, stage 2 discovery process is for the redirection-less flow. So based on your requirement, you can go ahead with a redirection flow or a redirection-less flow. There are quite a good number of people who are making use of both these flows. So it's basically, it's up to you which flow that you want to go ahead with. Well, we're going to be demonstrating each one right now. So imagine the situation. I have already the Cisco secure client deployed on the endpoint, discovered the PSN that it is supposed to contact with. Once it discovered the PSN that it is authenticated with, what exactly it is going to do? It's going to send the posture request to that PSN. Upon receiving that posture request, PSN evaluates the posture policies and sends that posture policies as an XML file for the AnyConnect or a Cisco secure client to validate. Upon receiving the posture policies, Cisco secure client validates that posture policies, creates a report, and submits the report back to the same PSN. This is when the PSN knows whether the posture state of the endpoint became compliant or non-compliant. This is where the posture status of the endpoint gets changed from unknown to compliant, unknown to non-compliant, or compliant to non-compliant, non-compliant to compliant, etc. Whenever there is a change in posture state of the endpoint, the posture service sitting on the PSN is going to initiate the COA to give the respective access. Let's say the posture report that it received was compliant, was changed the state of the endpoint, the posture status of the endpoint to compliant. That's when the endpoint gets the compliant access. Now let's look at them in the demonstration. I know this is very, very confusing or probably very cumbersome task. You might be knowing that it might be a cumbersome task, but let's look at them in the action. So I've already configured the client provisioning policy and access policy. Now let's try to authenticate this endpoint. This AD posture is my user. This is a Windows 11 operating system. And let's try to go to the control panel. Let's look at whether it got already connected to the network or not. So I have two adapters over here, wireless and wired. The wired one was already connected and it got authenticated with already. So knowing that it got authenticated, let's initiate some traffic, something like let's initiate the browser. I guess I'm going to get an access to cisco.com. Let's try to access cisco.com. As and when it tries to contact cisco.com, look at how the browser gets redirected to PSN FQDN. And this PSN FQDN was basically the connection was secured with the certificate. This certificate was already trusted in my endpoint because the endpoint was already having the enterprise root CS certificate installed on it. This is the first time that it was trying to contact the PSN because it doesn't have any Cisco secure client installed on it. It got redirected to client provisioning portal. So whenever it connects to the network, anytime when it connects to the network, it goes to this client provisioning portal. Considering this is the first time that I'm connecting to the network, I'm downloading the network setup assistant. I'm opening it up, running it. So this is a network setup assistant basically, which was trying to contact ISE node1.dominion.in. Because the connection was already secured through the certificate, and that certificate, enterprise root CS certificate, was already trusted in my endpoint, I was able to connect it without any security prompts. So it contacted the PSN, downloaded the agent, required packages for it to install. So if you notice clearly, it was trying to download the Cisco Secure Client, Cisco Secure Client compliance module, and installed it. Now that it was installed, sorry. Now that it was installed, and if you take a look at it, the Cisco Secure Client was trying to contact the PSN. That's what the discovery process is, what I'm talking about. So if you take a look at it, we have deployed 5.1.3.62 version, which is the latest and recommended one. And if you take a look at the configuration, ISE posture, it contacted the ISE node1.dominion.in, and the compliance model installed on this endpoint is 4.3. And these are the security products available on this endpoint. The Cisco Secure Client already detected it. And now let's hop on to our ISE live logs. If you take a look at it, initially when it got authenticated, the posture status of the endpoint is pending for so-and-so endpoint. And it matched with a posture unknown access where the URL redirect is configured. Let's look at the details of it. If you take a look at the details of it, this is the URL redirect and URL redirect ACL, which was already enforced on the endpoint session. Because it was getting redirected alone, the essential license was consumed here. Now take a look at the second entry where the dynamic authorization, where as and when the posture stated got changed from unknown to compliant, the posture service initiated this COA to let the endpoint get authenticated again. After that, it evaluates the authorization policy again, and it matched with compliant access authorization policy. And this compliant access profile has that ACL that we have allowed. Because the posture service was utilized over here, the premier license is consumed. If you take a look at the endpoint, let's filter it out with the specific endpoint that it just got authenticated with. And I wanted to just ensure what are the different license types and license details available in this live session in order to know what are the licenses consumed by the endpoint. If you take a look at it, it was consuming the Premier license because the session was making use of a posture service, or endpoint was making use of a posture service. Now, if you go back to the home dashboard screen, notice that the compliance dashlet over here, it gets updated with a 1. Whenever the endpoint gets authenticated and goes to the compliance status, the home dashboard screen gets updated. So clicking on it, it will take you to the context visibility page with a filter applied, by default filter applied. So if you take a look at the context visibility, you have a compliance dashboard that you can rely on in order to find out the compliant endpoints, or a compliance endpoint, or non-compliant endpoints, or unknown endpoints that it got authenticated with. So notice that there are 2 active endpoints connected to the network, and one is unknown and one is compliant, and another one is unknown, another one is actually went through the posture service and got the compliant access. The second endpoint, I was not making use of it. That was still getting redirected to client provisioning portal. Now, let's understand the same concept from the posture redirection-less flow. Now, if you noticed in earlier demonstration, the endpoint was redirected to client provisioning portal to download the agent. Now, it is not necessary to deploy the agent only from an ISE. In a redirection-less flow, I don't have to deploy agent from an ISE itself for the first time. It can be deployed via software distribution systems. You can even actually deploy agent configuration, agent profiles to the clients through the software distribution systems, where there is no URL redirect is required. So how do I deploy the agent? Now let's take a same example, same demonstration, and I wanted to actually customize it just for our convenience. So let's go ahead and modify our profile called ISE posture profile. Earlier, we just configured with a server rule. Now I wanted to modify it. I wanted to enable the debug log. I wanted to enable rescan button so that end users can perform the rescanning of their posture policies every time. Posture state synchronization interval, that means ISE might be thinking that the endpoint is in compliant, but the endpoint might be in unknown state. So in order to have the synchronization between the agent and the ISE, you can configure this posture synchronization state. This is where I'm going to be configuring the call home list to let the Cisco secure client know that it needs to contact ISE node 1.dominion.in, and precisely asking the secure client to talk to ISE node 1.dominion.in. So now let's go ahead and disable and enable the adapter again, so that the Cisco secure client automatically tries to retrieve the latest posture profile. Earlier, if you have noticed clearly, the scan again button was not available. Now that it was enabled. Why? Because we have already updated it from the client provisioning policy. Now, how come it was making use of how come it was actually getting updated? It's through the ISE posture. And now look at the ISE posture configuration XML file located in this program data. Let's open this XML file and let's see the details. Notice the profile that it was installed already updated. The call home list got updated, asking the Cisco secure client to contact ISE node 1.dominion.in always, irrespective of what PSN that it got authenticated with. Anyway, I was making use of only a single ISE server over here. So I want my endpoint to contact the ISE node 1.dominion.in always. The connection data XML file gets populated with the PSN list to which it contacted earlier. Because it contacted ISE node 1.dominion.in earlier over 8443, it was already having that record. So now that we have everything available on the endpoint, let's remove the URL redirect. Where did we configure the URL redirect? It's under posture unknown access. Let's modify the posture unknown access. Let's remove the web redirection itself. I don't want the endpoints to be redirected to the client provisioning portal. But however, I wanted to still make use of the same ACL called initial to restrict the access. So if you notice now, when the endpoint gets authenticated again, just to make sure I want that endpoint to authenticate again freshly, I terminate it from the live session so that it can come over the network again. So let's ensure now that it was searching for the policy server. Because there is no URL redirect, it is supposed to contact the call home list and it is supposed to reach the connection data XML file in the stage 2 discovery process. So the stage 2 discovery process is coming in play to contact call home list or to contact the connection data XML file records, the PSN configured with. So it was still talking to the same ISE node 1.dominion.in. And if you take a look at the initial authentication, notice that there is no URL redirect when it got authenticated freshly. So when the compliance status, posture status compliant, posture status is up to date, it matched with the compliant access, and in compliant access, we are not modifying anything. Full access is what the ACL that we are enforcing on the session. So the same flow is happening without URL redirect. In the URL, in the redirection-less flow, the stage 2 discovery comes into play like this. It will try to contact the call home list PSN FQDNs, and it will try to contact that PSN that it got authenticated with. So basically, you are statically asking the Cisco secure client to go and talk to the specific PSNs. That's how the redirection-less flow is working. Now, notice that the endpoint went through the posture service, and initially it got authenticated. It was an unknown state, and then after it was in a compliant state. But we haven't even configured the posture policies. How come it was actually moving the endpoint to compliant state? Because we haven't configured any posture policies. Let's take a look at it. If you go and run the report posture assessment by endpoint report for the latest one, notice the posture policies, they are empty. Basically, an empty XML file is being delivered to the posture secure client to validate. It says, I'm done. ISE gives a compliant access automatically. So because we haven't configured any posture policies, let's make use of a default posture policies here itself. You don't have to configure from the scratch. By default, when you install ISE and update the posture with the feed service, you're going to get all these posture policies by default. Let's make use of the default one. One is called retrieve the applications installed on the endpoint. The second one is to know whether the firewall is enabled on the endpoint or not. The third one is to retrieve the hardware attributes available on the endpoint itself, just for a visibility purpose. And the fourth one is to know whether there is any USB plugged into the endpoint. So those are the 4 policies, out of which 2 policies are to retrieve the hardware information and application information. Now notice the Windows firewall. I purposefully disabled this domain network. Private network and guest network, it was enabled, the firewall was enabled. However, for the domain network, it was not enabled. Let's do the scan again, try to see what happens. Now this time it was evaluating the posture policies. This time it came to know that the firewall was not enabled and it has to enable it. So it is automatically enabling the firewall and gets me the compliant access. So no need of user intervention. It automatically enabled my firewall in order to give me the compliant access. That's how the beauty of the default posture policies itself is. Now let's take a look at what exactly the posture policies that it evaluated with. Let's run the posture assessment by endpoint report. Let's look at the latest record details. Even though we have enabled 4 posture policies, you're going to be able to see all these details of the endpoint. Hey, this is on Windows 11 Enterprise 64-bit, and the system name, username, and what are the anti-malware installed on it. Even though we have configured 4 posture policies, 2 posture policies are to retrieve the applications and the hardware information from the endpoint. So the remaining 2 policies were passed and they are mandatory. Even though firewall was not enabled initially, Cisco Secure Client automatically enabled it. Even you can actually look at the same thing from the posture assessment by condition report. The posture assessment by condition report is going to show you the conditions evaluated by the Cisco Secure Client. What exactly the condition that it was evaluating, whether it is a mandatory policy or not, whether it was passed or failed, and what was the endpoint details, username details, IP address details. All these you are going to get it from the posture assessment by condition report. Now, we have made use of a default posture policies. Can I make use of a custom posture policies? Yes, of course. That's the beauty of it. That's what we are looking for. Now, if you take a look at the components in the posture policy configuration, it has the conditions and it has the remediations associated with it. The conditions and remediations can be mapped to a requirement, and requirements are going to be mapped to a policy. And at a condition level, whenever you are associating a condition to a requirement, especially when you have multiple conditions associating to the requirement, you can make use of AND condition, or none condition. At a requirement level, you can have an option something like, hey, even though the firewall is not enabled, I'm okay with it. No, I want the firewall to be enabled always. I don't care whether firewall is enabled or not, just to get the visibility, it should be an auditing one. So those are the 3 options available at a requirement level. You can make a requirement as a mandatory one. That means endpoints which are evaluating that specific requirement at a mandatory level, they are supposed to meet that requirement. An optional requirement is nothing but endpoint might not be meeting that requirement, and end user can even skip in order to get the compliant access. An audit requirement, it will not even notify the end user. It gets evaluated backend and it doesn't even actually come into play. It is to get the auditing of endpoint posture compliance. Let's say I wanted to ensure the endpoint was already domain joined PC or a personal one. Or I wanted to understand whether the specific or required root certificates are available on the endpoint or not, just for my auditing purpose or a visibility purpose. In such cases, you can make use of an audit requirement rather than mandatory or optional one. So at a policy level, you can enable the policy or a disable policy. We have already gone through it during our demonstration earlier. Now, what are the different examples? How can we map these conditions and remediations to a requirement? How do we map the requirements to a policy? Let's say I have a specific condition, specific remediation to be associated to that specific requirement, and that requirement is supposed to be mapped to a policy. This is kind of a 1:1:1 policy, 1:1:1 example, where I'm configuring a condition, I'm associating that condition to a requirement, and that requirement is supposed to be associated to a policy. Similarly for condition 2, similarly for condition 3. Let's take a look at the second example where, let's say I'm looking for multiple conditions at the posture level. I'm looking for a firewall enablement. I wanted to look for a patch, up-to-date policy, etc. Then in that case, multiple conditions can be associated to a single requirement with one single remediation, and that requirement can be associated to a policy. And these, because you are making use of multiple conditions, you can make use of AND operator or none operator at a condition level. I know this is kind of confusing. Let's remove your confusion by going through the demonstration. So I wanted to actually configure the custom posture policies. For me to configure custom posture policies, I wanted to first of all start with, let's say, a script-based condition. I have a script, a Windows PowerShell script, which was specifically looking for a domain joined PC. So this is for my visibility purpose as an administrator. I wanted to understand whether that PC was a domain joined PC or not. So that's the domain join validity condition that I created. And the next condition that I'm going to configure is disk encryption, let's say. I wanted to ensure whether disk encryption was enabled on the endpoint or not. So let's create a disk encryption condition called a disk encryption enabled check. Let's select the Windows operating system, select the compliance model 4.x. And because I was making use of none other than Microsoft Corporation, I'm going to make use of a BitLocker drive encryption 10.x version to understand whether BitLocker is enabled on my PC or not. And you have more advanced options such as whether a specific location is encrypted or system location is encrypted, whether it is partially encrypted or a fully encrypted. I wanted to understand all of them. So that's the disk encryption policy that we created. I'm not going to create any remediation. Let's go ahead and configure the requirement. Let's configure a new requirement, one for script-based one, which is nothing but a domain joined requirement. Let's give it a name. Select the same operating system Windows because we have created a check for a Windows. So I'm going to be creating a requirement for Windows itself. Select the agent type as an agent, script-based one, and a remediation. I'm going to make use of just a message. I wanted to give them a message. Just for an auditing purpose, I don't want to disrupt any end user experience over here. Let's create one more requirement for the check that we have created called disk encryption. So let's give it a name, the requirement name called disk encryption requirement. Same Windows operating system, 4.x compliance model. The agent is persistent agent. Because we have created, the administrator has created, let's look under disk encryption checks, select that condition that we have created earlier. And let's give it a name. I mean, the remediation, I'm not giving any remediation, even though the disk encryption was enabled or disabled. I don't care. I just wanted to notify the end user, or I don't want to notify end user also. I just wanted to validate whether disk encryption is enabled or whether the PC is domain joined PC or not, just for an auditing purpose. So let's create a posture policy. Condition was created, requirement was created. Now we are creating the policies. Let's give a policy name domain policy. Let's select the Windows operating system 4.x module. And now I don't care whether it is a domain joined PC or not. I just want, for my visibility purpose, out of X number of devices, how many of them are domain joined PCs and X number of people who are non-domain joined PCs. So disk encryption policy I'm creating for the second check. This is 1:1:1. One condition was created that was associated to requirement, and the same requirement was associated to the policy. Now, instead of making use of an audit, I'm going to make use of an optional at a requirement level. So now, let's say in the action, let's log into the Windows operating system. Now let's scan. Instead of authenticating from the scratch, user can initiate the scan again. And now Cisco Secure Client was retrieving the posture policies and it was trying to look for these policies. Look at it. The disk encryption was not enabled on this device. Yes. But I don't want to actually go through the remediation. I wanted to just skip it. That's an optional condition. But whereas look at the earlier one, the audit one, it was not even notified. It was not even notified to the end user. Because it is an auditing one, it's not going to notify the end user at all. User will not even come to know. Now, this is one specific one which you're supposed to actually look at this. If you go to the program data, Cisco Secure Client, AnyConnect Local Policy XML, this XML file contains the trusted ISE certificate fingerprints. What does it mean? It has the SHA-256 values of the certificate that it can contact with and can validate the script-based conditions. Notice that we are running script-based conditions on the endpoint. That script might be very harmful without even having a proper knowledge. If it goes through the script-based validation, it can become a security problem to your endpoints. That's when you're supposed to configure your secure client AnyConnect local policy XML file with the specific fingerprints of your PSN SHA-256 fingerprints. Whenever it tries to contact psn1.cisco.com or psn2.cisco.com, PSN1 might be having a different certificate, PSN2 might be having a different certificate. That certificate fingerprints, SHA-256 fingerprints, are supposed to be configured here in the AnyConnect local policy XML file. And how are we configuring them? Unfortunately, this cannot be done via ISE. You would have to actually take care from the software distribution models. What does it mean? If at all you wanted to make use of a script-based condition, first of all, your AnyConnect local policy XML file has to be updated through the software distribution systems. It is irrespective of your redirection or a redirection-less flow. Because the endpoint was now trusting the PSN that it was trying to contact with, because those fingerprints are available, you can even configure the root certificate authority fingerprint at a deployment level with a fingerprint of your root certificate authority so that it can validate the script-based condition. Now let's take a look at the report. Let's run the posture assessment by endpoint. Let's take a look at the recent one. And if you look at the posture policies that we have configured already earlier one firewall, USB. The next two, the last two are disk encryption policy and domain policy. The domain policy is a script-based condition which is in audit and it's passed because AnyConnect was already configured to trust the PSN that it is talking to. Notice that the condition script execution was successful. If you don't have that fingerprint or a SHA-256 fingerprint updated in the local policy XML file, the script validation will not be successful. If you run the posture assessment by condition, you will be able to come to know what are my audit policies, what is the state of each and every condition, and how many endpoints that are failing against an audit, how many of them are passing against a mandatory, how many of them are passing with an optional condition, so on and so forth, using the posture assessment by condition report. That's how you can create your own posture custom conditions. I just actually demonstrated 1:1:1. That means condition was created, that condition was associated to requirement, and that requirement was associated to the policy. And one is an audit, and another one is an optional one. Now let's look at the last aspect or last workflow, monitoring and reporting. How do I visualize the endpoints connecting to the network, and how do I get the data or a reporting out of it? First and foremost, these are the possible ways for you to get the details of the posture service. You can look at the live logs, you can look at the live sessions to know the posture status of the endpoint and whether the posture service was being utilized by those endpoints or not, or whether they were consuming the premier license because of a posture service. Then after, you can even come down to the home dashboard screen to look at the compliant endpoints that were validated, the posture policies that you are configured with. You can even rely on the context visibility. You can even rely on the reports. You can even rely on the data connect log analytics. The log analytics, which was introduced in a earlier versions, doesn't have the posture reporting capability under log analytics. In 3.4, we were having this posture information visualized through the log analytics as well. So let's look at them from one by one. How do we look at the information from the live logs and live sessions which are getting authenticated with? Notice that there are total 30 endpoints are available. Out of them, 2 are active at this moment. Let's go to the live logs. Let's filter out with an authentication passed only. Let's not worry about anything else. Let's filter the records over the last 3 hours. Notice that the posture status was actually, this is how we have already validated, right? How they got authenticated initially, how they got authorized to the posture unknown access and compliance access whenever the compliance status gets updated. That's how you are basically looking at the details of live logs to understand what kind of an access and what was the posture status of that endpoint is. If you go to the live sessions, I'm going to specifically use the live session, especially for a license consumption, because out of all my endpoints, 10,000 endpoints over there in the network, how many of them are making use of a posture service, how many of them are making use of whether they were consuming the premier license or not. That's how you will come to know. So look at the details of a license type. This session was specifically consuming the premier license. It's because it was going through the posture service. Those are the details that you can actually look at it from the live logs and live sessions. Let's see how we can look at the information from the home dashboard, context visibility, and reports aspect. Let's go to the home dashboard. Out of 30 endpoints, 2 of them are active, but only one is actually got compliant access. So if you hover your mouse on the information icon, it was clearly articulating that these many endpoints were in compliant state. Clicking on it will take you to the context visibility applied with that filter. That means it will show only the compliant devices alone. You can even come to know what are the failed conditions and past conditions that were validated by this endpoint, against this endpoint. This is a Windows 11 Enterprise 64-bit version and it is compliant with. If you go to context visibility endpoints, compliance dashboard, you'll come to know those 2 endpoints which are connected to the network. Because we are retrieving the application and the hardware information from the endpoint, you will also see those details. If I wanted to look at the full details, these are the applications installed on the endpoint. Remember, we have enabled the application visibility and hardware visibility. This is to retrieve the hardware information and application information from the endpoint. And from this, you can even create your own application condition. let's say I don't want a DirectX 412X version to be available. I can create even posture policies from it. If you go to the full details of this endpoint, attributes of this endpoint, you'll come to know the posture status, what are the failed conditions and past conditions against that specific endpoint with. Now it comes to the reporting. How do I monitor all this from a reporting angle? These are the posture assessment by endpoint reports, by conditions report, all of them. We've already gone through it. I'm not going to waste much of a time over here. I'm going to skip it because we already gone through it. So the left-hand side, whatever the reports available, those are the commands which you can make use of. But remember what I said earlier in the earlier webinars. These reports, whatever you are seeing on the screen, was static ones. You might not be able to add one more detail until and unless there is an update available around it. What does it mean? The columns available from that table is fixed. You cannot actually add one more column. If at all you need one more column, basically we need to give you a patch in order to get it reported from that reports. So instead, the data connect is very useful in such kind of an aspect. Why don't we make use of an external data sources to connect to the ISE DB over data connect channel so that we can retrieve the configuration and the operation information directly from the ISE. Because ISE has each and every ISE node has the configuration data and configuration data, we are trying to contact the secondary MNT by default because we are going to be doing the queries on the reports. It's heavy on the query. That's the reason why we're going to be connecting to the secondary MNT if possible, if it is available. So let's take a look at it. I'm making use of SQL developer tool to connect it to the secondary MNT. In this case, I connected to the ICE node 24.dominion.in over port 2484 with a certificate or a JKS. Now let's take a look at the views or tables that we can even make use of. Out of all these tables, I can make use of, especially for a posture service, I can make use of posture assessment by condition, posture assessment by endpoint, posture grace period, so on and so forth. Those are the tables that I can query on. Let's take an example of posture assessment by endpoint table. I'm going to query that posture assessment by endpoint table. The query is built to give me the unique users or devices which are having compliant, non-compliant, grace compliant, unknown. Notice that I have 1 compliant, 3 non-compliant devices, 0 and 0 unknown devices. The second query that I built is to get grace compliant, non-compliant, unknown devices with a unique users. So if I run this query, it's going to give me the users and their respective posture status. The same table, if at all without any conditions, if I query it, you're going to be able to see much more information than anything else. You can basically filter it out based on the columns or a table information, columns or a report that you want. Let's say I wanted to query distinct users which are compliant. Give me the users which are in non-compliant state. These are the non-compliant users. This query was basically giving me the username, endpoint MAC address, operating system, and the username is equal to AD posture. So I wanted to filter the records where the username equal to AD posture with the same user with how many endpoints that we could log in. And how many records are available? Basically, these are the 3 records available. So you can basically make use of all this data to query it and apply the filter. It's basically a simple SQL query that you can rely on. Specifically, this one, posture assessment by condition table has a lot of information available, but I wanted to show only the endpoint condition status, and if at all the condition status is passed or failed, I don't care, but I wanted to order it in a descending manner. So if I run the same query, it's going to show me the endpoint ID, username, operating system, posture status, whether the condition is failed or passed. So that's how basically you can look at it. The log analytics, I'm going to actually skip it for the time being, but I wanted to take a moment to cover the NAD dependency. This is the most common question that I usually get from the audience, customers or partners or even the users. What exactly the NAD dependency on the posture service? Let's take a look at it. If you go and look at the cs.co ISE-interoperability of network access devices, the network access device interoperability was showing you that what are the different network access devices features which are dependent on a specific service. Look at this, posture service is dependent on radius COA, URL redirect, and a session ID. So the posture service to work, your network access device is supposed to support the radius COA, URL redirect, or a session ID. But in some cases, in some network devices, third-party network devices, they might not be supporting the URL redirect. But if they don't support a COA itself, how come ISE can issue a COA to give different kind of an access? You have seen in earlier slides that ISE was issuing a COA to give him a compliant access from pending to compliant, from compliant to non-compliant. It is issuing a COA. If network access device that you are making use of was not compatible to honor that radius COA, which is nothing but a RFC 5176, you cannot even actually make use of this posture service. So if there are customers, if you are making use of any third-party network device, the third-party network device is supposed to comply with this RFC 5176, which is called Dynamic Authorization Extension to Radius, which is responsible to give different kind of an access throughout the session journey of an endpoint. That's the dependency we are talking about. Now, just to make you excited with the second part of our webinar, whatever we haven't covered today, or probably we haven't particularly, probably we are not clear about it, we wanted to cover it as part of a part 2. Plus, this is the agenda that I'm going to be covering. We haven't even looked at the global setting. We haven't even modified it. We haven't asked the client to go through the periodic reassessment. I want my endpoint to go through the posture policy evaluation again and again for every 8 hours probably, or 4 hours probably, so that I can give the associated access and update the access accordingly. Can I give a grace period to the endpoints whenever the endpoint is getting authenticated and they are not up to date with a specific patch? For me to download and install that specific patch, it might be taking 1 hour or it might be taking half an hour for me. So do you want me to be there in the unknown or restricted access there itself? Or do you want to give such kind of a users a 30 minutes access window, like a grace period, so that they can download it, install it, get the compliant access accordingly? And posture release, that's another aspect. I don't want my endpoints to go through the posture evaluation again and again every time they connect to the network. Considering an example like me, when I go to when I go and grab a cup of coffee, or when I uh, just out of a station, when I'm going out of one room to another room, whenever I'm connecting to the network again and again, I don't want my end users to go through the posture evaluation. I want my user experience to be easy and simple as is. So for every 8 hours only, I want my posture policies to be evaluated. That's what the posture lease is. Then we're going to be talking about the remaining agent types. How do we configure them? How do we deploy them? How do we monitor and report them? Stealth agent, temporal agent, agentless. That's what my agenda is going to be for the next part. So if you have any questions, if you have any confusion around this part 1, let me know through your feedback so that I can cover it in the next upcoming session, part 2 session. So with that, I'm going to leave these resources for you.